It's difficult to fully understand what day-to-day life must have been like for our hunter-gatherer ancestors, because as historian Yuval Harari says, 5 million to 8 million foragers who populated the world on the eve of the agricultural revolution were divided into thousands of separate tribes with thousands of different languages and cultures. What we do know is that they were made up of small clans and tribes, some of which may have rarely, if ever, encountered other humans. So it would have been difficult for them to understand and even trust strangers. Some of them may have become friendly and lived in cooperation. Some of them may have been threatened or threatening, resulting in hostility and violence. In their tiny worlds, anything different or unknown could have proved deadly. There was safety in sticking to the tried and the true, to being creatures of habit, which meant avoiding strangers and anything else that was unfamiliar. And that's an interesting word, unfamiliar. It means not family. And our primitive ancestors needed to stay away from anyone who was not family. When they encountered others, they may have recognized that they were similar to each other, similar beings, but they had no understanding of what a species is, or of DNA, or that we are all genetically related. Homo sapiens evolved to think of people as divided into us and them, Harari says. Us was the group immediately around you, whoever you were, and them was everyone else. This instinctive mistrust of those we are unfamiliar with persists today, including the archaic and disproven idea of race that was developed in 1824 by Johann Friedrich Blumenbach, considered the founder of zoology and anthropology. Blumenbach classified 5 different races based purely on skin pigmentation: black, brown, red, yellow, and white, which aren't even accurate colors. And by measuring and comparing the craniums of these various races, as he put it, he also believed he was able to rank each by its intelligence. Blumenbach's bad science was something that many people at the time accepted as fact and would for some time, especially white people who it just so happened to be the smartest according to his findings. It wasn't much later at all, in 1859, that Darwin introduced his theory of natural selection, the more substantive and rigorous scientific idea that all human beings evolved from a common ancestor and are related. Only 6 years after that, in 1865, Gregor Mendel published his findings while experimenting with plants, establishing the science of inheritance and genetics. Only 4 years later, in 1869, Swiss chemist Friedrich Miescher was the first to discover nucleic acid, an important step in determining the structure of DNA that was discovered by James Watson and Francis Crick as recently as 1953. So we now know that the idea of race is fiction, yet we still speak of it as if it's real, just as we still say the sun rises and sets, even though we know it is really the earth that is turning, not the sun. And if it's not the illusion of race that we use to divide the human family into us and them, it's something else, like the notion of nationality. What nation are we from? What side of the border are we on? What religion do we believe in? What political party do we belong to? What kind of economics do we prefer? Or what identity group we claim to be part of? Yet we know that we are one species, one human family, living on an increasingly small planet, and that we have far more in common than we do not. In addition to being so closely related that there's more genetic difference between two chimpanzees living in the same troop than between any two human beings living on Earth. These days, we are increasingly part of a global community. We have a global economy, a global banking system, global businesses and companies and employment, global communications, global courts and laws, global education, global science and medicine, a global supply chain, as well as share global challenges like war, pandemics, pollution, and climate change. We share all of this in common as one global human family, and yet we still haven't implemented a universal Declaration of Human Rights, even though we've had one ready since 1948. Its very first article states, all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. All human beings are born free in dignity and rights. Too many of us, however, still think and behave as if we are hunter-gatherers. Thousands of separate tribes with thousands of different languages and cultures. There's a saying about horses, which is really meant to be about humans, that you can lead them to water, but you can't make them drink. And this is based on an actual fact that some horses will not drink unfamiliar water. When transporting horses, equestrians often have to bring gallons of water with them for this purpose, for this reason. Horses can be as innately wary of unfamiliar water as humans can be of unfamiliar people. Heliocentric notions of our solar system, for instance, have been around since 270 BCE. Were revived by Copernicus in 1543 and popularized by Galileo in Jesus. Galileo in 1633. Oh my gosh, I don't usually pray at church like that. God forgive me. I remember when in the church in Louisville, we had a group of delegates, Muslims from Afghanistan, and they came and they were looking for a place to do their noontime prayers. And I offered the church for them, and they were concerned, well, what goes on in this church? Do you pray? Do you have crosses? I said, oh no, there's no prayers or crosses going on in this church. So they were able to use it to do their noontime prayers in. Anyway, back to the sermon. So you get it, right? The idea of a heliocentric galaxy or solar system has been around a long time, at least more than a couple thousand years. And yet again, we still speak as if the sun revolves around us, as if it is actually our little world that is at the center of the universe, rather than speaking of earth sets and earth rises. And even worse, we still speak of race as if it were a reality 200 years past the Enlightenment, when genetic science was born. In these cases, we say what we say about horses ought to really be said about humans, as you can lead a person to reason, but you can't make them think. And this isn't to say that all people are incapable of reasoning or seeing themselves as global citizens, members of a single human family. As the troubadour of humanity, John Denver, once explained, I am a global citizen. I've created that for myself, and I don't want to step away from it. I want to work in whatever I do towards a world in balance, a world that creates a better quality of life for all. And this resulted in songs containing lyrics like, why are you calling this the third world? I only know that it is my world. Maybe someday it can be our world. Can you imagine one world? One world? That's from his song, One World. And in another song, it's about time. He said, there's a man who is my brother. I just don't know his name. But I know his home and family because I know we feel the same. And it hurts me when he's hungry and when his children cry. I too am a father, and that little one is mine. Denver worked to make his vision a reality, but no more so than the great Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., as he wrote in his letter from a Birmingham jail in 1963, we are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. King's dream of a better world for all of us was rooted in this same universalistic notion of our common humanity. I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal. I have a dream that one day little black boys and girls will be holding hands with little white boys and girls. I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. During his 1965 commencement speech at Oberlin College, Dr. King pointed out that before most of us even leave for work in the morning, we've been assisted by people across the globe. Our towels and soap, our coffee and tea, our toast, and even our toasters and so much more have been provided to us by people all over the planet. And before you finish eating breakfast in the morning, you've depended on more than half the world, he said. This is the way our universe is structured. This is the interrelated quality. We aren't going to have peace on earth until we recognize this basic fact of the interrelated structure of reality. This universalistic understanding of human relatedness is why I attended Singularity University in 2018, a school of thought dedicated to making the world a better place for everyone, better than it's ever been. As its executive director, Will Weissman, said at the start of a 2019 annual summit, I'm here because, like so many of you, I believe in my core that an abundant world is possible in the not-too-distant future, and I want to do everything I can to help bring it to fruition. To me, this looks like a world where we feed everyone, where we educate everyone, where we shelter everyone. A world where people feel safe and they feel that they have a fair shot at living a good life. A world where there are mechanisms to help curb our deficiencies and overcome our most base impulses. And as its founder, Peter Diamandis, often says, this mindset is about using our wit and our creativity to improve life for the whole of humanity. Rather than a future of dog eat dog, I see a world of increasing abundance, Diamandis says, a world where we can actually imagine uplifting humanity and using technology to meet the needs of every man, woman, and child. And this principle of universal human dignity is also what attracts me, as I suspect you, to Unitarianism. It's the starting point of liberalism and the starting point of our liberal religion. And it is the reason that ours was the first religion in human history to establish a law protecting religious freedom, the Edict of Torda in 1568. Born because of the budding Renaissance idea that all people, no matter what they believe, ought to be treated with respect and dignity. And this was so no matter their status, whether they were Catholic or Protestant, Christian or Muslim, native or foreign, rich or poor, king or citizen. In his international best-selling book in defense of the Enlightenment, philosopher and historian Tzvetan Todorov, includes an entire chapter called Universality, which begins by recognizing the fact that all human beings belong to the same species and that consequently they have the same right to dignity. Yet he adds that the imperative takes on a different meaning if we think of it in terms of citizens of a country or the inhabitants of planet Earth. Human dignity must, by definition, be predicated upon its universality. It cannot be confined to one people, the people of one nation, any more than it can to one tribe or one person. To be human dignity means it's not just American dignity or tribal dignity. It must apply to all people of all nations and all groups. Such universality, on the other hand, includes the people of all nations in any group. But it cannot belong to us and not them. It cannot belong to the insiders and not the outsiders. Human dignity further shifts the goal of our ethical behavior to achieving human welfare and individual fulfillment rather than obeying arbitrary religious laws and secular laws. Immanuel Kant was the first to articulate it by suggesting that no person should be treated as a means to somebody else's ends, but should be considered an end within themselves. Violating this principle is what makes Israel's response to the horrors of October 7th, the October 7th attack, such a tremendous evil. Because in order to achieve its goal of eliminating Hamas, it has considered the suffering and killing of innocent Gazans, real human beings, mostly women and children, no more than a means to its own ends. And of course, the U.S. has had a history of similar behavior, as evidenced by its wars in Vietnam and Iraq and Afghanistan. There are plenty of examples of how this principle has been violated around the world throughout history, including in our post-Enlightenment modern times, because you can lead a person to reason, but you can't make them think. And from this first principle, human dignity, which must be universal by definition since all people are human, we easily infer the most obvious conditions for maintaining such dignity: freedom, reason, and tolerance. Quite simply put, freedom means being able to speak for ourselves. Reason means being able to think for ourselves. And tolerance means being free to participate in all the rights and benefits of society, regardless of what we say, what we think, what we look like, or where we are from. Free to go about our lives without prejudice. So for me, tolerance is the most valuable mechanism for achieving human dignity. And some argue that it just doesn't go far enough, that we must love one another, that we must strive to understand one another, and to fully embrace our differences. Well, like the song says, what a wonderful world that would be, if it were possible. But how can it be? And why should it be? How, with more than 8 billion people in the world, can any single person possibly understand where every single other person is coming from? Why would I want to embrace ideas and customs that I consider fundamentally false and flawed or even detrimental to human welfare and progress? Must I embrace the perspective of flat earthers? Must I embrace Donald Trump's lies about Haitians eating our pets? Must I study and embrace all the world religions or philosophies or the countless other ideas that exist on this planet? If creating a peaceful world in which all people are treated with dignity requires us to understand and embrace hundreds of millions of ideas and ways, then we are doomed. Nobody has the bandwidth for that, nor the intellect for it. But if we simply accept that every person should be tolerated based upon the principle of human dignity, on the basis that they are human beings, then it should not matter what they believe or what country they're from or what culture they have or how it might differ from our own. We can take one look at them and see all we need to know. That as a fellow human being, they deserve to be treated with worth and dignity. Enough said. And as for love, if by love it is meant that we must all have warm sentiments for every other person we encounter, no matter how loathsome they might be, forget about it. Not going to happen. But if by love we mean adhering to the humanistic ethic that requires all that we do be for the purpose of promoting human welfare and individual unfolding, then tolerance remains more than enough. We don't have to like everyone, we don't have to agree with everyone, we don't have to understand everyone, and certainly we don't have to embrace everyone. But we do have to tolerate them because they are human beings and therefore deserve to be treated with dignity. And this means no matter what we know about them or how much we might disagree with them, we respect their freedom to think and to speak and to freely go about their lives without prejudice, enjoying the same rights and freedoms as us. And further, tolerance means that each of us has a duty to guarantee that the freedoms and rights that we do enjoy, that do belong to everyone, including especially those that we might vehemently disagree with. We don't just get to preserve freedom for those who think like us. We have to demand it for those we're convinced are wrong. And if in the process we learn to befriend and to love some of them and come to understand them and maybe even embrace them and their ideas, maybe even be transformed by their ideas, fantastic. That's great. I hope you've all had that experience before. I know I have. It's great to have our minds changed. But let's concentrate on getting that tolerance part down first. After nearly 5 centuries after the Edict of Torda, let's make it happen. To do so, and to begin to wrap up, I think it's important to understand some of the common logical fallacies that get in our way of seeing the dignity of those with whom we might dislike or feel are dislike us. In last week's sermon, I quoted Twilight Zone creator Rod Serling, who said, "I happen to think the singular evil of our time is prejudice. It is from this evil that all other evils grow and multiply." From a humanistic perspective, rooted in the humanistic ethic requiring us to work for human good, prejudice is the mindset that prevents us from recognizing the humanity of others and that excuses us to deny their worth and dignity. That's what prejudice does. That's its purpose. I don't have to adhere to what's obvious. Prejudice lets us off the hook. And this is obviously true of racism. But even the slightest differences, and by the way, skin color is just that, a very slight difference, can give rise to prejudice. And this is why I believe that Donald Trump's promise to make America great again at the expense of people elsewhere in the world is doomed to failure, because it is not based in the reality of our universal humanity. That we are, as Dr. King said, caught in an inescapable network of mutuality tied in a single garment of destiny. We cannot make one people great without working to make all people great, because one people is all there really is. We must rather, as Diamandis says, work to create a world of abundance that uplifts every man, woman, and child on the planet, which means we must make every nation great, and every city great, and every person great. So that's the first fallacy, the fallacy of us and them. That is a remnant of our prehistoric ancestors. A fallacy that's disproven by the science of Darwin and Mendel and Watson and Crick. Every person on this planet, no matter what they look like, where they are from, or what they believe, is human, and thus deserve to be treated with dignity. Take one look at anybody, and you'll see all you need to know. Another fallacy excusing indignity is called the fallacy of composition. In technical terms, it occurs when the qualities attributed to individual members of a class or of a group are attributed to the class itself, class as a whole. If, as Trump has done for example, we take the criminal activities of a very small percentage of immigrants and conclude that all immigrants are criminals, then we wrongly demonize most immigrants and justify treating them like criminals. And this example also illustrates a fallacy of confusing correlation for cause, which you're probably more familiar with. Just because a criminal happens to be an immigrant doesn't mean they're a criminal because they are an immigrant. Most immigrants are not criminals, and most criminals are not immigrants. And closely related to the fallacy of composition is the fallacy of division, which is really the opposite. It occurs when we take the qualities attributed to the class as a whole and attribute them to its individual members. Take, for example, male and female, common male and female stereotypes. If we think men are generally masculine, driven, and tough, then we question the manhood of a male who isn't. Or if we think women are generally maternal, nurturing, and selfless, sacrificing, we might judge or dislike individual women who don't know their place. Another fallacy used to justify prejudice is the straw man argument. And this is when one, not willing to address the real argument at hand, shifts to another weaker argument that can be more easily handled or defeated. For example, upon questioning Israel's indiscriminate killing of tens of thousands of innocent civilians, we often hear Israel has a right to defend itself. It's a different argument. Of course it has a right to defend itself. Few, if any, have said that it doesn't. But that's different than wiping out everyone who stands between Israel and its goal. It doesn't mean that Netanyahu's government can treat innocent people as a means to its own ends, because Palestinians are human beings. They must be considered an end within themselves, instead of having their precious lives brought to a permanent end, which is what has happened. Scapegoating may be the fallacy that is most often used for justifying prejudice, and is precisely what Hitler, his Nazi regime, and others around the world did to the Jews, including in the U.S. at the time. Leading to the most cold-blooded genocide in human history. It occurs when we want to avoid taking responsibility for our own problems by falsely blaming them on somebody else. And a lesser-known fallacy is the Latin phrase "to quoque," which means "you too." It's what happens when we justify treating somebody with indignity by blaming them for having done the same thing or doing the same thing, right? Children often defend their actions this way, right? He started it. She said it first. But it can be extremely troubling when adults justify cruelties and inhumanities against others by saying, everybody does it, or they do the same thing. George W. Bush's preemptive strike against Iraq was partly based on this kind of thinking. Strike them before they strike us. It just blamed them for doing the same thing as us before they could have done the same thing as us. And I don't want to leave out the fallacy of affirming the consequent. This is a very common mistake. I see it happen. Ordinary people use this one. You should learn about this fallacy and catch yourself affirming the consequence. To illustrate, if we agree, for example, that misogynists are males, then we conclude that John is a misogynist because he is a male. We have committed this fallacy. It's like saying that rainbows contain purple. The bouquet contains purple, therefore the bouquet is a rainbow. Right? Just because you affirm the consequence that it has the color purple doesn't necessarily make it a rainbow. There are lots of things that are purple. Yet this is a very common way of thinking and leads to a lot of prejudice. It's the fallacy of the thinking of some on the left nowadays who claim that all white people are white supremacists on the basis of being white, or that all white people are privileged on the basis of being white. That's what we call racism. And I've taken the time to point out these fallacies because as we move more deeply into the 21st century, soon to have reached its 25-year mark, we need to promote a more reasonable approach to the future and to establishing the kind of peaceful and prosperous world that humanity has been longing for centuries, but can't achieve because we keep making the same mistakes, keep thinking in the same old primitive, illogical ways. We need to purge ourselves of the bad thinking that leads to prejudice against our fellow human beings and learn to see our common humanity and the dignity that goes along with it in the faces of every person on this planet. Everyone we meet, whether we like them or not. Prejudice in favor of humanity is the only prejudice we can allow. It's the only prejudice we can tolerate. No matter what else you may know or not know about them, when it comes to dignity, just one look at any other human being, and you will see all you need to know. Thank you.